Okay? All right, so now I'd like to explore, that's going to be graph number 6, the feminine and the masculine. It's the ever-present duality is what we're going to look in. I'm going to just show you the graph really quickly, and we'll be going through this graph. Okay? I'm going to describe it really quickly before we get fully into it. And that is that the two forces that create the zone of society have their own, let's call them temperaments, or their own differences of expression, okay? And they're very clearly observable or dominant in our societies, in our humanity, if you will. And one such example is the world of, in this case, is femininity and masculinity, which is the two forces that I explored, versus the male and female born individuals, okay? Which can be defined as well, separately from femininity and masculinity. Okay, so what I'll do is that I'm going to put the females in this category, males in this category. I'm going to put a liberty acceptance or rule of law on the left, and then orders and directives on the right. And we'll look at different ways these things express themselves. Okay, so the more something becomes male, that's where you get in terms of law. Right? You have to remember that this is the important part to recognize here is considering that we're looking at law, we're looking at archy. That's why you have patriarchy and you've got matriarchy. All it is whether a female-born body or a male-born body is executing the governing act, right? The archy. But otherwise, it's a governing act nevertheless. They're no different, really, other than who the messenger is. And thus, if we had a society just full of males with no females, that would be just a patriarchy, because it's just males. If we have only females around and they're making all the decisions, or it doesn't have to be, this is where it's going to get interesting, is that you don't need to have no females and males, because we're constantly mixed up. Except exceptions, of course, right? But by and large, we mix, right? And that creates dosages of patriarchy and matriarchy in the system, as it will outline. So patriarchy shrinks liberty and individualism, and it expands order and collectivism. Whereas matriarchy shrinks order and collectivism and expands liberty and individualism. Okay? If we had a world dominated by males in the act of governance, but they wanted to give liberty, basically when they exercise rule, because they also notice that even though the bubble is patriarchally clamping down, they still have to maintain a certain dose of feminine liberty in the picture that they have to legislate for. Okay, so this quadrant here is that what the males would grant, and that would be, this law gives liberty influenced by male traits, right? Acceptance of masculine traits, acts upon, and it's communal, okay? And so is over, this one is acts upon and communal. These are all communal, right? This law, which is the world of males exercising order, putting order, is going to give directives influenced by male traits. So masculine traits giving orders. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see, right? Whereas on the bottom side, this law gives liberty influenced by female traits. Right? So the males are going to give liberty to more masculine traits, whereas females are going to give more liberty to more feminine traits, which is just liberty itself. Right? That's why you see this diagonal expression predominantly, right? Because most males in society will want to create order. Doesn't mean that females can't, right? That's why this law gives directive influenced by female traits. So this is if women were to impose rules, they would by and large, because females come with feminine traits, their traits will be directly influencing their decision making in the world of laws. Okay? Humans come packaged with temperaments, right? Two dominant categories, feminine and masculine. Every human is born with a dose of explorative and playful femininity and a dose of controlling and orderly masculinity. A mother can tell a child to not misbehave just as much as a father can, in different ways, right? It is liberty versus order in some equilibrium. It's always liberty versus order in some equilibrium. Okay? These two opposing forces are mutually exclusive. If you're granted liberty, you can't be held responsible. And if you are granted responsibility, you can't have liberty. Okay? That's why when you sign the dotted line, you have given liberty away to some degree in order to grant privileges within a zone of society. Female human phenotypes can express masculinity just as much as males. This is super important. Okay? It's the female-born humans, they have masculinity in them just as much as males. And males they are able to express it, okay, just as much, except with the extremes, right? And the quantity of people born with it. And males can express femininity very much like females. It is present in both females and males. Males and females can both regulate an order and give orders as they can receive them. That's the important part. It's give and take always, right? So you can give the order and you can also receive an order. World of giving, taking directives. Right? That's that world. And they can equally express a free, independent act, right? A man or a woman can do an independent act, as well as accept and defend someone for that independence. World of being accepted and giving acceptance. Okay? So you can defend someone's right to be independent. The feminine is not the same as matriarchy. That's very important. Okay, this one here. Hierarchy or archy or governance is the expression of asserting dominance and regulating order, which are masculine traits. Thus, laws and rules are temperamentally masculine and can be performed by both males and females equally. Okay? It just shows that females and males both have that ability. It's just that statistically, more males will want to give order, whereas more females will want to just take care and be, protected. But that doesn't mean that there's no females on the other side that also want to give order, and males would want to just, have liberty all the same, right? Like females. Females regulate societal groups as a matriarchy just as much as males do through patriarchy, through strict order, and with strict matriarchal boundaries. The order type is just different from patriarchy, which has patriarchal boundaries. Boundaries are different, but the orders are the same. Matriarchy and patriarchy both do impose strong masculine or certain masculine order. For example, matriarchy shames, patriarchy punishes. That's another one in terms of how they maintain it. That's a one dominant characteristic. The overall males in a society can end up exercising greater form of mimetic dominance over the overall females, as well as vice versa. So it can get out of balance, where all of a sudden most males are calling the shots, or most females are calling the shots. And this means the overall male energies of a given society's males and females will express some overall amount of male energy, as well as female energy in some place of balance. They'll find some spot where that bubble of zone of society will kind of come into an equilibrium, right? This means that no system is ever purely patriarchal or matriarchal, okay? Every society is patriarchal and also matriarchal at the same time, with a strong dose of each, okay? And creating an ever-moving and evolving balance and its stabilization. So whether males or females are pushing up or down, at some point males are going to dominate, and then the system will be more patriarchal. It's not patriarchal, it's more patriarchal than matriarchal, and vice versa. Okay, and they both act in the service or in the goal or aim to have power, to create order, if you will. Okay, regulating behavior through order is a reaction to what once would have been free, allowed, libertyful behavior. Okay? For example, with the invention of vehicles and traffic, using an accident that a person caused, for example, frivolously drove into traffic intersection, the greater society, that is, the governing branch for traffic, creates new traffic signal with a crosswalk, with accompanied law, stop at the red light. So, before roads even existed, there was no need for a red light. But once the roads were created and people started getting hurt, the society at large created a new law. So it emerged, right? Where did it all come from, right? It came from, biologically speaking, female body needs, male body needs, and furthermore, the need for subjectivity and the need for objectivity, one's social nature and one's individualistic nature. Each one of those I'll be exploring throughout this talk. We're still technically warming up. Identity, masculine trait value, giving of the self, feminine trait value. Okay, that's another way of thinking about it. Okay. Well, I'm not sure about this one. I might need to relook at this one, because this is like a big crossword puzzle that you need to put together. Not really, just puzzle, not crossword puzzle. What am I talking about? Each of these values can be thought for society. Each one of them can end up being imposed onto people who don't have that value. It's the balance between. Okay, matriarchy and patriarchy are both ruled by law, as I was saying just now. Then also you have anarchy, which is there's no law. Oligarchy, which is when only few do it. Monarchy, when there's a single individual. Autarky, which is from self. I found that one. I'm not sure what exactly it is. And hyperarchy, I think it's also another when it becomes just too much of governance. Now let's look at the sexism boundary law. Let's really dig deep now. The strong distinction in style of governance comes from females and from males. Since statistical majority of females are genetically more feminine than masculine, when in position of governing roles, as I was saying, they will express a stronger emphasis on matriarchal or acceptance allowance, while the majority of predominantly masculine males will focus on imposing patriarchal guidance, each moving the legal boundaries respectively. Every societal system sets the boundaries based on its overall ethical worldview, reaching a particular state of ethical balance. Okay? It's the ethical balance that matriarchal and patriarchal dominant systems differ in. Deprivation of liberty, the masculine closes in. Range of punishments, being grounded, cannot mingle with the rest of society. Jail cell. When extreme, terminations and totalitarianism. Right? Deprivation of the order, on the other hand, the feminine opens up. When extreme, discharges and anarchy. So as you look in here, we've got the zone of tolerance in the middle, which I will explore in a lot of detail in a bit. And then you got the zone of tyranny, when the order becomes too strong, and zone of anarchy, when there's no order. Right? By allowing oneself to be libertyful, true femininity would allow others to express their libertyful femininity. This, by virtue, both accepts oneself for whatever one is, and all the others for whatever they are. It is within that world of liberty that masculinity acts upon. So that starts first, and the masculinity comes in and creates order. In order to protect and guard it, it's kind of like a shell, right? And by virtue, control it, right? Manipulate and govern it. A mother's femininity comes out when she cuddles her child, and her masculinity comes out when it guides and disciplines the child against the dangers of the world, right? So the mother does the same, but the mother does both, just like the father would. Laws are created out of the opinions of the people to begin with. In fact, out of the majority of the people that agree, which gives a statistically common census, which is common sense, common knowledge. If something becomes law, there's a high chance that there was a strong societal dose of rules that were already in place, just not legislated. So it was already brewing. It was a needing to be made sure to be met. There will always be a dose of off-the-shelf rules throughout society that are not officially laws, making people have certain dress codes versus certain people wanting to dress how they feel or behave a certain way versus behaving however they want, or to make people do things even though they don't legally have to do it. Companies and offices will have policies which, if disobeyed, will lead to disciplinary action or termination, right? Judgmental gossips operate through informal expectations. So this is a very constructed sentence, is that gossip is that under the hood kind of a ruling entity, wanting to rule entity. It goes through judgments, just like every law. It's all judgments. But judgmental gossip is sort of kind of the under the hood operating through informal expectations. It's not formal. Together with laws, they're all there to further reinforce societal orders and be on standby if they ever need to become laws. Right? So laws are constantly competing for breath, and if one law falters, like patriarchal law, the matriarchal will just jump in, because there's only so many laws that can be implemented. When a female creates order, that is by definition a masculine trait and behavior, and since it is a female making it, it will classify it as a matriarchal behavior. If it was a male making order, that is again also a masculine trait, but as it is a male influenced and male driven, to its essence will be different, making it a patriarchal behavior. Okay, so I'm just reiterating what I'm doing right now is just looking at this picture from different angles, just so that we all get a sense of what exactly I'm talking about. Genes need epigenetic methylation to create and maintain living organisms, and similarly, memes need governing, epimemetic, operant conditioning to create and maintain cultural societies, or zones of society. Note whether male or female with another male or female. Giving way to the other displays an act of femininity, liberty, and allowing the other side to have masculinity, order, submitting oneself to the other. Meaning both males and females can have order over one or the other, as well as be able to have liberty around one or the other. Okay? Now, this is probably the most detailed graph that I'm about to embark on right now. And this is the world of mating, coupling, family, and life. And I think this example really illustrates how the boundary between the zones of society can really move around a lot, as we will see right now. Okay, what I've done is that I've created a bit of a graph. Let me just have a yes. I'm going to explore the graph that I made on mating and coupling and family. Okay, right now. So we've got one person from some moment in the past, and then into their life until they pass, okay, until they die. And the moment in the past doesn't have to be the same time as the moment they're born or conceived. The first record of a person can be at their conception. Before that, there would have been just egg cells and the mother, right? Then there's the birth. And then when the person can... now, I'm going to just point out what the graph's about before I continue going in this line, and that is there's a window of what I like to call of societal responsibility for another life, okay, in a society, okay? That's the world of marriage. It's the window of societal responsibility for another life. Okay? Now, another life can actually mean also to your partner. But it by and large also means, in its traditional sense at least, the ability to, or the aim to legally make someone responsible around having children. Okay? Now, when someone is conceived or born, they can't technically have responsibility because they themselves are totally coming out of the feminine, really. They're coming into the masculine world of order, and the mother really exerts femininity in its purest form, in the form of the creating the child, and that's a world where there's no responsibility. You can actually start seeing the gradual transition from femininity towards masculinity. Okay, now once they're born, they still one still doesn't necessarily have, because again, societal laws can move around, as we'll find out soon. Would a person be able to be responsible for new life, but when they're biologically reproductive, when they're a minor, or whether they'll be able to be responsible when they can legally commit, right? Meaning their biological reproductivity is not necessarily the same moment as when an individual is considered able to legally commit, meaning with parental consent you can marry. That's the age. And then there's the day when they're legally an adult, and in that case they're able to make that societal responsibility, which doesn't mean that they have to take it right away. Modern societies allow a person to take that responsibility if they wish at some point right here. Okay, and that's where the responsibility switch happens when they sign that contract. Okay, the responsibility up until then was non-existent. This is a private contract, really, rather than a contract you were born into, although not necessarily, as we'll see soon. Then we can go into the zone of, once we are entering the world of parenthood, we have the union of the gametes is the actual fertilization. Okay, that's the moment when conceptions happens, right? And then we usually like to think of this period of 9 months as 3 trimesters, and there's a point of delivery of birth, and the fetus is somewhere around here, as we'll get to that soon. And then when the child maturity starts at some point, that's more this biological reproduction of their own child, which is right here. So the same thing is happening here. As the child is born, you see they're born here and they're biologically reproductive, and at some point that responsibility that they took on here, the switch, is going to turn itself off at some point before the person passes, hopefully, and biologically becoming unreproductive is another element that is worth considering in terms of the ability to have children, right? And then that individual becomes a responsible individual in their own world, right? And then they can choose to have children and continue the cycle on and on. Okay? Now, I'm going to read through some of these to explore this, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of this. Legal responsibility for life, with a spectrum of pivotal moments that are able to trigger sociocultural proceedings, making one take on legal responsibility for creation, acceptance, and guidance of a new life. Okay? Societal responsibility for oneself and their biological existence are not aligned. Okay? Predominantly because of the child being helpless for so long, that's what I was just saying, and needing an adult to be responsible for their survival until they are ready to be made to have to take responsibility for themselves. The need to be taken care of is legally binding by default in societies even before you are born. Okay? So that's the contract of marriage. Right? when one signs the contract, one stops plans of not actively aiming to of having a child. Okay, so all of a sudden you are interested in having a child, and you're legally bound to it in many marital contracts. Sexual activity in or out of wedlock. So however it's going to happen, their aim is to have a child. Extra modern as well as an ancient factor, sex for fun, which comes into a confrontation over the need to take responsibility for kin and family. Okay, so that's another. I'm just doing it as a side note because humans are not born with the strict aim to know when a contract is signed, and now their biological self will just adopt to the contract, but rather humans continue to be interested in sexual activities beyond, which becomes a cultural issue rather than a biological issue. But that's where the confrontation happens. That's where the biology can fight with cultural societies. This is my take on how I would view when life starts exactly. I like to look at everything from a standard deviation perspective, which is about 68% of something expressed in my books becomes something that we can call an existent entity, because it's statistically significant enough to be an entity, really. What I also think is that something that is the opposite. So we can think of 68 as 2/3, and then just for the sake of having it easier to understand, the standard deviation is 2/3 of something is an entity, whereas 1/3 is something. If something is only 1/3, that means that it's not existing on the opposite side, if that makes sense. And that's what I'm going to explore right now, and that is that life started a long time ago. All of this life, everything is a process that is just moving around and cycling in the process and redoing itself, and the individuals who are aiming to have a child already have cells. The female has cells already in her, whereas the male can produce it at any point. So those processes are already functioning and ready to create life. So life already exists. The idea is at which point that life that is to be can be pronounced an actual individual. And from that angle, one can be born into a society where at birth is known who they're going to get married to. Which means that, and this is the projection into the future, the order. This is where you can see the patriarchal masculine order coming in, which is, even though life hasn't happened yet, culturally speaking, it has, because it's already been decided contractually between the families most of the time that, and in royal families, it's a bloodline. So they push that existence of the next child into the far future. Okay. Or it could be when they're biologically reproductive. Some societies on Earth still practice this. As soon as the girl is biologically reproductive, for them that means they're able to procreate without necessarily paying attention to the overall maturity of the person, which is a separate topic entirely. And at that point, they can have arranged marriages of all sorts happening, and then we come into the point where the person can legally commit to somebody. Right, and once they sign the dotted line and enter a marital contract, the child is officially wanted contractually, meaning the eggs and the sperms are now bound to create child life, right? And of course, when conception happens, that's the moment where the married individuals with the functioning processes that are living and are technically already children in our minds as well as about what's to happen, then the conception goes into a spot where the two just become one. Now, a lot of people consider that that's the moment where the new individual has started, and I think that's mostly because there's the sperm that makes it. So because it's unique in its expression and it's a brand new entity, although every sperm is brand new and eggs are have been already made, so it's kind of like deck of cards. There'll be some did the card game start when you made the cards, or when you deal it when you get your dealt cards? When did the game start? Right, that's the game. Standard deviation. Fetus starts around week 9, which is about 22.5 of pregnancy length. That's why I put it here. If you see, this is when union of gametes happened with fertilization, and this is the delivery or birth. Right around here is where the fetus is, okay? And that's about 22.5%. Fetus is non-existence. It is not statistically insignificant anymore once it crosses the fetus line. Once the fetus is formed at 22%, is starting to reach its point where its non-existence, which would have been 68% standard deviation, is going to become small. So as far as I'm concerned, the non-existence is 100% the moment of conception, because it needs to be built still. And the existence only happens once its non-existence becomes statistically insignificant, if that makes sense, okay? And the fetus, the development of fetus at 22% is entering that 30% or 1/3, at which point, so I would say, me personally, life, I would pronounce it as officially starting if I had to draw a line. And as I've realized, it's it's more moderate places if one wants to allow unwanted pregnancies. At that point, before fetus stage, it's only that one living organism, especially if it's a female organism. Fetus stage is also when its own egg cells start to develop, right? oocytes. Once she will have forever, right? For the rest of her life. And that happens at weeks 8 to 20, okay? That's when the fetus starts having its own reproductive cells starting to develop, okay? And by the time the baby is born, it has 1 to 2 million immature egg cells. I didn't know this before I did this research. That's a lot of humans. Pregnancy is the period when an incredible amount of human life cells get produced. Incredible amount. So from that 8 to 20 week period when the fetus becomes, after that, it goes exponential in terms of how many potentially human cells that could get produced, up to 1 million. So to me, the closer, once it crosses, especially once the child is 68%, once it's grown 68%, then it's officially an entity in my books. And that's where I would not stop the life for sure, right? So this is where the point where I would consider it. This is the point where I wouldn't consider it. This is birth, right? Okay? So yeah, technically aborting at this stage, you're not only aborting especially if it's female, a child, but also a whole lot of other would be humans. And this is why it's such a sacred thing, even for people who think generationally in terms of preserving as many eggs as possible, right? Now, another element, extreme patriarchy binds couples from the promised past into forever and ever. This is why traditional storybooks have once upon a time and then happily ever after, because what patriarchy does, so watch this now. The ability, actually I'll start it from the responsibility. It's about, to go back to the premise, it's about taking responsibility for another life. The more matriarchal, the more allowance. The more patriarchal, the more directives or order. So matriarchy will promote liberty, which means that we live in a society in the West where a female is not only able to not have been married off before, say, she was born, or for that matter, a man before he was born, because both sides get pushed into marital contracts within a patriarchal system, as well as males and females push for it. So patriarchy doesn't necessarily mean that only men are pushing it. It's just the type of system that both men and women push, which just regulates for predominantly male traits. Okay, and so birth, biologically reproductive, even when they're legally, he and she or the person is legally able to commit, doesn't have to do it. Even when they're legally adult, they don't have to do it. Even once they marry, they don't have to do it. Even once they have a child, they can choose to abort it in some societal progressive systems until the very last moment of before birth, and it would still be their legal right. And a female additionally is able to cross, and this is why I had this biologically unreproductive. They can choose to go until either they're biologically unreproductive or until they pass. So the full liberty is granted, which is the full feminine expression. That's why we'll see most progressive and liberal types of societies have more of matriarchal values dominating in them. So in a way, the system is closing in. Or better to say, closing in on the order from above, wanting to tell the individual what to do, and the individual is free to express it. Of course, that can come, if they choose not to have it, can come at the detriment of new life. But the point is that the laws given to the individual and what they want or need, right? Versus patriarchy, which, as you see in the graph, so matriarchy will close it in, right? Whereas patriarchy will open up the order. Patriarchal will clamp onto liberties and create order by pushing against everything, and that way they will try to, marry off as soon as possible, or it'll be like marry before they, sign, somebody before they're of age, or as I said, in royal families they can go, and that's, since times began, this family has been the same line of genetics, right? And forever and ever. So they also open it up so that it will continue forever and ever. Everything is ordered and pre-planned. Okay? So these are two ways you can imagine the zone of society expanding itself it's the breadth of legislation that can express itself depending on whether the society is predominantly influenced by feminine matriarchy or predominantly influenced by male patriarchy. Okay? And to me, the extremes, Huizera Peterson comes to mind when he asked, when does the left, which is femininity, go too far? And to me it would be when it pushes it to a point where it's legislating, promoting, and wanting individuals to have that level of liberty versus planning for family as well, right? So for me, I would always see it that it would be somewhere in between. So it wouldn't be pushed completely to the left or the right, but it would be somewhere in between. To me, the cutoff would be at just before fetus develops. Okay, that's on mating, coupling, and family and life.